When my wife returned home from her job at the village landlord's house, she would be limping, with strange marks on her neck and a smile on her face. One day I decided to follow her and was shocked by what I discovered. She wasn't spending her day working in the landlord's house. Instead, she was inside his young son's room all day. This story is one that every married man should hear. Razia, why don't you leave that job? I work in the fields too. We'll manage somehow, I told her. Look at yourself. Every time I see you, it breaks my heart. I haven't been a good husband. I can't fulfill your needs and desires. That's why you end up doing such exhausting work at the landlord's house. Just look at your hands and feet. You can't even walk properly now. And those landlords don't even show you any mercy. When you leave in the morning, you only return at night. When you leave at night, you come back the next evening. How is this any way to treat someone? I sat down in front of Razia, both angry and ashamed. I was upset with her, but I also felt guilty because I wasn't able to meet her needs. It was a few months after our marriage when she suddenly announced that she wanted to work at the landlord's house. Despite my initial protests, I eventually gave in, thinking it was better to let her work a few hours if it made her happy. But over time, her work hours increased and her health deteriorated. She had been strong and healthy, but now she returned home limping, utterly exhausted, collapsing onto the bed and sleeping until morning. Sometimes the landlord even called her at night, and she wouldn't come back until the next evening. This situation deeply troubled me. That day, she returned home in the morning after being gone all night. She limped her way inside, collapsed onto the bed, and started taking heavy breaths. In my anger, I told her she didn't need to work there anymore. Even though I earn little, at least you won't have to go through such misery. Just leave that job. I began to massage her feet, trying to explain, but Razia shook her head. You know the landlord's rules, she said. Once a woman starts working in their house, she's a servant for life. I can't just quit. There are many secrets within those four walls that only the women working there know. If those secrets come out, it won't be good. That's why they never let us leave. She continued, I know a lot about that house, so what's your problem? I'm not worried about it, so why are you? I looked at her and said, have you seen yourself lately? Look in the mirror. Your face has turned pale. Look at your swollen feet. It seems like they make you stand for hours on end. But what secrets are so important that they must remain hidden? Everyone in the village already knows how cruel the landlord is. What more is there to hide? As I gazed at her with questioning eyes, Razia closed hers and replied, stop asking meaningless questions. There's nothing worth explaining. Just get some rest and let me rest too. Her words stung, but what hurt even more was the fact that every evening she returned home so drained. That's exactly the issue, I said quietly. You come back exhausted, collapse into bed, and fall asleep. Meanwhile, I sit here just watching you. Have you ever considered my needs, my feelings, even once? At that, Razia opened her eyes again. Her gaze was heavy with sorrow, an expression I'd never gotten used to, no matter how many times I saw it. Faisal Bakhsh, she said, I've told you before, it's late and I need to rest. Why do you keep dragging me into these discussions? Then she slowly turned away, facing the other side of the bed. It was as if she didn't want me to see her face anymore. But her demeanor caught me off guard. There was something so unmistakably sad in her eyes, a deep sadness that seemed to linger even after she looked away. And how could I not notice? She wasn't just my wife, she was my first love, my only love. I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. I was barely 13 years old when I first laid eyes on her. She was standing by the village well, fetching water, and I instantly knew that she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. Back then, Razia and her family didn't even live in our village. They came from a neighboring settlement, but a devastating flood had swept away their homes, leaving them with nowhere to go. Many families scattered to nearby villages, trying to find shelter wherever they could. Razia's family came to our village because her aunt lived here. Her aunt took them in, and that's when my life changed forever. From the moment I saw her, I was captivated. Even as a young boy, I felt something so strong that it never faded. Through the years, I grew to know her so well, her habits, her expressions, the little changes in her demeanor. It's as if I could read her like a book. That's why that night when I saw the sadness in her eyes, it weighed heavily on me. She didn't need to say a word. I knew something was wrong. But what exactly was it? I couldn't help but wonder why she was putting herself through this job. Was it truly because she wanted to fulfill her wishes? Or was there some deeper reason, a necessity that she couldn't avoid? A part of me felt certain that Razia no longer wanted to do this work, yet something was holding her back, something she hadn't told me. As the night grew darker, Razia eventually fell asleep. I stayed beside her, pressing her feet gently, trying to ease the tension and pain I knew she felt but never admitted. At some point, I must have dozed off myself, still sitting by her side. When I woke up the next day, she was still there, resting at home. But by the time evening arrived, she began preparing to leave again. "I need to go back to the landlord's house," she told me. "I won't be home tonight." Her words struck me like a blow. I frowned at her, and she quickly said, "Don't be upset. You know how it is. When the landlord calls, I have no choice. I'll be back by morning, and then we'll sit together, talk about everything. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She could see the disappointment on my face, and she reached out to hold my hands. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I know you're concerned about me, and I appreciate it. I'll be okay." Her reassurance, however small, always had a way of melting my anger. Still, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. "I only want what's best for you," I said. "I hate seeing your health deteriorate. I hate that you've grown so pale, so frail, as if the weight of the world is on your shoulders. It's unbearable for me to watch." Razia gave me a faint smile, a flicker of light in the otherwise heavy atmosphere. "I know you worry about me," she replied, "but everything I'm doing for our future. You'll see, our lives will get better." Her voice softened, and her gaze became wistful. "I've already lost so much. The flood took everything, our home, my friends, my livestock. I can't bear to lose anything more. All I want now is to build a better future, for us and for everyone connected to us." Her words carried a quiet determination, and the love in her eyes was unmistakable. I knew then that her actions weren't just about personal desires. They were about rebuilding, reclaiming, and holding on to what little she had left. It wasn't just work for her, it was a fight for stability, for hope, for the simple joy of knowing she could protect the people she loved. And as she spoke, I couldn't help but admire her strength. Despite everything she had lost, Razia's heart remained steadfast, her resolve unshaken. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. I knew the depth of her pain, her resilience, her love. In our village, livestock weren't just animals. They were part of the family. Losing them was like losing a piece of your soul. For Razia, the flood had taken not only her possessions, but also her sense of security, her childhood dreams. Yet here she was, fighting to build something new. I could see it now. Her sacrifices weren't in vain. They were for us, for a future that she believed in, one where we could finally find peace and happiness again. Her childhood friends, those she had grown up with in the neighboring village, had all moved to different places after the flood. With that, every bond she had was severed, except for her parents who stayed by her side. Once we were married, she moved into my house, meaning even her parents were now far away. I understood her isolation and her pain, which is why I remained silent as she prepared to leave for the mansion around 8 that evening. As Razia draped her shawl over her shoulders and started heading out, I got up as well. "Wait, Razia, tonight I'll walk you there myself. These winter nights are pitch black, and even the village dogs seem to bark more these days." Wrapping my shawl around myself, I stepped forward, only for Razia to immediately protest. "That's not necessary, Fezlbakhsh. Razia isn't a child who can't handle the village streets on her own. I've been living here for years now. There's no need to worry. Besides, you've worked hard in the fields all day. You need your rest." I tried to reassure her, explaining, "It's not about being tired. It's my responsibility to make sure you're safe. I'm telling you, this village is pitch dark tonight, and the lights are out. I'll take you there myself." Without giving her a choice, I walked out of the house with her. She seemed unusually uneasy, her behavior tense. Every now and then she glanced at me, with a worried expression, and once or twice she stumbled on loose stones along the path. A couple of times I reached out to steady her. "See, Razia, this is exactly why I insisted on coming with you," I said. "Just look at how dark these village streets are. There's barely any light, and the barking dogs seem to be everywhere." She didn't reply, but her silence only deepened my concern. When we reached the mansion gates, I stopped. "All right, I'll head back now. You can return home in the morning." I waved and motioned for her to go inside, but Razia stood still at the gates. "No," she said. "I want you to leave first. I need to see you walking away. Just like you worry about me, I worry about you. How will you manage to get home in this darkness?" Her words made me smile, and I replied, "Razia, I'm not a child. I was born and raised in this village. You don't need to worry about me. I'm a man. You're a woman. There's a difference between us." Still, she wouldn't budge. "For my peace of mind, please walk back a bit so I can watch you go." Seeing her concern, I obliged. I turned and started back down the path. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, and she would either wave at me or smile faintly until eventually she disappeared from my view. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept thinking about Razia, about what sort of tasks awaited her at the mansion and how much effort they would require, especially in the freezing cold. She was my love. Leaving her alone at the mansion during those long nights went against my every instinct. But what could I do? Razia always had her way. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off. Early in the morning, Razia returned home. Her gait was limping, and her face bore the marks of fatigue. Without a word, she collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. She didn't even pull a blanket over herself, so I got up, took one from the trunk, and covered her. As I leaned down to spread the blanket over her, something caught my eye. Marks on her neck, as if scratched by nails. I froze, my mind racing. I pushed her hair aside and found even more marks. Razia was fast asleep, unaware of my discovery. I decided then and there that the moment she woke up, I would ask her about it. I left for the fields after breakfast, deciding it was best not to disturb her. When she brought me lunch at midday, I motioned for her to sit with me on the Shar-Pei. I needed to find out what those marks meant and whether something deeper was going on. She had set the traditional mustard greens and cornbread before me. Without hesitation, I asked, "Razia, what happened to your neck?" My question startled her. She stared at me for a moment, then quickly tightened her scarf around her neck and replied, "What could possibly be wrong with my neck?" Her reaction puzzled me. I said, "Last night, when I came over to cover you with a blanket, I saw several scratches on your neck, like nail marks." She hesitated briefly, then said, "Oh, those are just my own nail marks. While I was working, I felt as if something was crawling on my neck, so I scratched myself too hard." She then laughed, a strange artificial laugh that did little to reassure me. I chose not to press the matter further and just stared at her in silence. After that, I spent the rest of the day struggling to focus on my work in the fields. When I returned home that night, Razia was getting ready. She told me she needed to go out again. "I've rested all day, so you don't need to worry," she said. She wrapped her shawl and began to leave, but I stood up, prepared to accompany her. This time, however, she firmly said, "There's no need for you to come along. Last night you worried yourself unnecessarily. I can go on my own." With that, she stepped out quickly, leaving me no chance to object. I didn't argue, but after she left, I silently followed her. The truth was, I was genuinely concerned about her, though I had no idea what I might find ahead. I kept my distance, staying several feet behind her, but I knew her usual route well enough to follow without trouble. She was clearly visible in the faint moonlight. However, just before reaching the mansion, she suddenly took a different path, one that neither led to the mansion nor back home. Instead, this path headed toward the outskirts of the village. My heart skipped a beat. Why would she be walking down that road at this hour of the night? A deep sense of unease crept over me. Something didn't feel right. I quickened my pace to close the distance between us, thinking that if anything happened, I would be close enough to protect her. After all, she was my wife, and keeping her safe was my duty. I caught up until I was just a few steps behind her, but I made sure to tread softly, not wanting to alert her to my presence. The barking of dogs echoed all around, masking the sound of my footsteps. Then I saw her stop in front of a door that left me utterly shocked. It was the door to the elder son's estate, the Wadera's son's dera. Everyone in the village knew that place was far from safe, especially for women. The reputation of the Wadera's son was notorious. What went on there under the cover of darkness was no secret, but no one in the village dared to speak out against him. In fact, the women of the village were strictly forbidden from going anywhere near that place. Yet there was Razia standing before the door. And then, to my astonishment, she opened it and stepped inside as if it were a normal, everyday occurrence for her. It was as though she had done it countless times before. My mind reeled as I recalled the night I had escorted her to the mansion, and she'd insisted on staying by the gate until I left. Could it be that on that night, too, she had not gone to the mansion, but instead come here to this dera? The thought sent a jolt of dread through me. Razia's calm, almost practiced manner as she entered that place left me shaken. I could barely process what I just witnessed. Was she regularly visiting this place at night? That was the question that made the ground shift under my feet. Summoning my courage and suppressing all my doubts, I cautiously stepped inside the dera. There were no guards present. Everyone in the village knew it was the domain of the landlord's son, so no one dared to approach it. Had Razia not gone inside, I likely would have never mustered the bravery to cross that threshold myself. Slowly and silently, I crept into the dera. Through a partially open window, I caught sight of the scene within, and my world turned upside down. Not only was my wife Razia in the room, but so was Shah Nawaz, the landlord's eldest son. Seeing the two of them together sent a shockwave through my chest. As Razia shifted slightly, the rest of the room came into view, and I felt as if my blood ran cold. Two young women were bound with ropes, struggling desperately. Their mouths were gagged. Shah Nawaz was instructing Razia to remove their gags, feed them, and then tie them back up. After issuing his orders, he left the room. Razia obeyed, removing the cloths from their mouths. The moment she did, the two girls began shouting at her, their voices thick with rage and despair. "How could you do this to us? Don't you have any compassion? You know we're suffering, yet you won't help us," they cried. Ignoring their words, Razia began feeding them as if they were animals. One of the girls, after having her hands freed for a brief moment, lunged at Razia's neck, scratching her in a desperate attempt to defend herself. Razia recoiled and scolded the girl harshly, saying, "Because of your scratches, my husband is growing suspicious. Don't you dare touch me again." But the girl didn't back down. "Why would we show you mercy when you have none for us? You're helping him do this to us. It's a good thing your husband suspects something. Maybe he'll finally see how low you've stooped for money. You've inflicted so much pain on innocent girls like us just to please that Shah Nawaz," she spat, her words filled with venom. Razia slapped the tape back over the girl's mouth, tying her hands once more before turning her attention to the second girl. The second girl also cursed Razia bitterly, calling her heartless. But Razia remained silent. She finished feeding them, stood up, and said coldly, "I'm not going to live in poverty in this village forever. The money Shah Nawaz gives me will allow me to move to the city and start a business with my husband. I'll leave this place far behind. I can't stand this village or its system." With that, she walked out of the room. I stood there, stunned. My wife's true nature had been hidden from me all this time. I never could have imagined her capable of such cruelty. She was treating those helpless girls so harshly, all for a bit of money. But who were these girls? Why were they imprisoned here? I knew the only way to get answers was to talk to them directly. Once Razia left, I climbed through the window into the room, quietly closed the door behind me, and untied the girls. I promised them I would help, but first I needed them to tell me everything. The two girls revealed that Shah Nawaz had abducted them from the city, drawn to their beauty. He kept them imprisoned at the dera, using them whenever he pleased, only to tie them up again afterward. Razia's role was to feed and care for them. Both girls harbored immense anger toward Razia. When I softly mentioned that I was Razia's husband and had followed her there, they were surprised. Seizing the opportunity, I helped them escape through the same window I had used. Shah Nawaz, so confident no one would dare approach his dera, hadn't bothered with heavy security or guards. I personally escorted the girls as far as the main road leading back to the city. I gave them all the money I had and put them on the first available vehicle bound for the city before returning home. The next morning, when Razia didn't come home, I went searching for her. Initially, I assumed she might have gone to the mansion after her work at the Dara. But when I inquired at the mansion, the landlord firmly stated that Razia didn't work there. Confused, I went back to the Dara and saw Razia standing in front of Shah Nawaz, her head bowed. Shah Nawaz's rage was palpable. I stepped forward and asked what had happened. He said angrily, "Your wife has helped my two girls escape. I won't let her off so easily." His fury was directed squarely at Razia. When I looked at her, it was clear she was avoiding my eyes. Caught in her lies, she eventually confessed everything to me. Furious, I said, "Then you deserve the punishment Shah Nawaz gives you." "Accept it." Shah Nawaz declared, "I paid her well and she betrayed me. She can't stay in this village any longer. I want her gone. If it weren't for her years of service, I'd take her life. But because of her long service, I'll only demand she leaves the village." With that, I took Razia and moved to the city. I was harsh toward her, saying many bitter things, and she apologized repeatedly. She confessed that poverty had driven her to follow Shah Nawaz's orders. We lived in the city for some time, trying to leave the past behind. One day, as we were walking through the market, we ran into one of the girls. The moment she saw me, she began thanking me profusely. Razia stood frozen in shock, and I then admitted that I had been the one who had helped the girls escape. Hearing this, Razia was speechless. She broke down in tears, begging for my forgiveness for all her mistakes. I forgave her, as the girls themselves had also forgiven her. Sometimes greed for money can blind people to their humanity. Razia had fallen into that trap, but the real villain was Shah Nawaz. I hadn't been able to bring him to justice, and neither had those girls. Even now, countless villages are ruled by men like Shah Nawaz, who exploit not only local women, but also women from cities. The law, it seems, cannot reach them, as their influence extends far beyond its grasp.